All right, so we are going to be continuing on here talking about independence with, we talked about India. Now we're going to talk about the whole world and the idea of this fall of colonialism with nations breaking free. And one place where we really see this is Africa. Okay, and you had a theme, I guess you could say, at this point of the idea that it's time to break out. It's time to develop our own nations and time to get rid of the colonizers. They also knew to a certain degree that after World War II, many European powers were going to struggle financially and militarily to be able to maintain this. Now, it doesn't mean that it happened right away. Some would happen as early as the late 1940s, but some would, wait until the 1970s. So it's not like it's going to happen right away. But what you end up having going on here is this idea of Pan-Africanism. And I have a great quote on the right to give you an idea. Pan-Africanism is the belief that people of African ancestry throughout the world have the same racial and cultural characteristics and the same social and economic conditions as a result of our African origin. And the idea here is that to unify themselves, if you will, against what other nations had done. And we talked about the belittling of the African culture and the zoos in Belgium and the idea of social Darwinism and things along that line. And these folks are going to unite. And the idea of what was known in the mid-1950s as negritude, the celebration and unity of African culture, okay? You're going to fight cultural oppression. You are going to show and teach African history and things along that line so people can truly know and you can begin to fight the racism that was present in the world and fight for freedom. And there were a variety of examples of groups that were really, really successful in this, and certain leaders. For instance, Haile Selassie in Ethiopia was able to break free, and we said the Ethiopians had a long history of this anyway. Frantz Fanon in Algeria, and Algeria had to fight a very long war with France in order to get to get free. And again, I have a great quote. Sometimes people hold a core belief that is very strong. When they are presented with evidence that works against that belief, the new evidence cannot be accepted. It would create a feeling that is extremely uncomfortable and called cognitive dissonance. And because it is so important to protect the core belief, they will rationalize, ignore, and even deny anything that doesn't fit with the core belief. And Fanon was bringing this up because it was the idea of that these people are inferior and we as Europeans have the right to control this area, and so they'll rationalize their horrible treatment. They'll rationalize discrimination so that they can keep it going. And Fanon was the one that brought that up and really started to fight for his people. And Angola fought a war with Portugal for 13 years. I mean, you see this rising up and these folks really trying to make a difference. However, the biggest success probably happened early on in Ghana. And if you look at Ghana today, Ghana is a nation that has had quite a bit of success. They have their troubles like all other nations, but they don't necessarily have that stereotype of the brokenness that much of Africa faces today, but we know why they face that. And he had a great quote over here. A state in the grip of neocolonialism is not master of its own destiny. It is this factor which makes neocolonialism such a serious threat to world peace. And what he was trying to bring out the idea here is that even though these nations were breaking free, they were still coming under control things like foreign banks, much of which owned by the former colony masters like Britain and France and things like that. And the idea of neocolonialism was becoming like economically reliant on these outside factors to try to do anything, and which also resulted in political corruption and things like that. So what Kwame Nkrumah was trying to do is develop political parties, ideologies, and his idea was to really focus on building African nations that would work together to help each other out. Okay, and the key thing for that was going to be the economics, was bringing economics together, was bringing foreign trade in, was developing business, and doing all of these things so that these countries can have success. And in the end, Ghana would have a lot of success. And certain countries that were able to focus on their economies and were able to really develop trade and industry is the key. But a lot of Africa has not been put into that position, and we'll be talking more of those issues later on. Now, this doesn't mean that this always works out super well, okay? South Africa, for instance, is able to break free. However, the descendants of the British were still running things there. And what they created was a system known as apartheid. And apartheid, it's just the most brutal racist government that you could ever see. But what they made it even worse was that they would not only do you have strict segregation, look at the picture of the bottom left. You had to use a different staircase. I mean, think about it. It's a different staircase. It's crazy. And on the right, caution, beware of natives. So these men were actually walking out of the main town in which they worked, mostly servant type jobs. And so this was letting the white folks know that as they were leaving the area, be careful, there might be natives there. Blacks were not permitted, particularly African blacks, as well as there was a large Indian population here. They were not permitted to have any type of high-end jobs. They were prevented from having any type of education. They were not permitted to be in the government. They even had to move and live in specific parts of the country, often referred to as black homelands. This was nuts. It's as bad as you can imagine. And this is probably, you could say your favorite, but look at this. Natives, Indians, and coloreds. So a native is a native African, Indians are Indians, and coloreds are often mixed race people. If you enter these premises at night, you will be listed as missing. Armed guards shoot on sight. Savage dogs devour the corpse. You have been warned. What? This is a real sign. This isn't a maybe. But this is where one of the towering figures of the 20th century comes in, that being Nelson Mandela and the ANC, or the African National Congress. So early on, as you see on the top there, a young Nelson Mandela, he was trying to fight it peacefully, but sadly the government would start to fight back, and a large amount of protesters were killed in 1960 that made the ANC and Nelson Mandela become a little bit more violent, that they were going to violently resist and destroy stuff and basically rise up, sabotaging a variety of different things and stuff like that. Well, not surprisingly, what ends up happening is that he ends up being imprisoned for this. However, there's no real trial or anything along that line. He is just thrown in prison, and he will stay there for he will be jailed in 1962 and kept into jail right around 1989, 1990. Now, it's in prison that he starts to change, because he went from this kind of aggressive, angry man to one that was a bit more self-reflected. He's an incredibly brilliant man, but he's a bit more self-reflective in trying to understand how he can change. And as you see here on the top right, I mean, it really is a brilliant quote here. As I walked out the door, because he would be eventually released. So, as I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison. And this is going to be really important, which I'm going to go to. He is able to write. Some of the guards would allow him paper and some pencil. Eventually, he pens an autobiography, which gets released to the world. On the bottom, you see that is his cell. You can actually go visit it on Robben Island today, right off the coast of South Africa. And this is actually a picture of President Obama visiting his cell. Now, here's the key thing. So Mandela is actually offered a couple chances to leave, or to get free. Unfortunately, that wasn't going to happen, because if if they let him go, they said you have to leave South Africa. He's not going to do that. But what ends up happening by the 1980s, people, it took a long time, but people start to hear about apartheid, and there becomes a massive movement against it. It's worldwide. World famous tennis players like Arthur Ashe starts to lead boycotts against South African tennis players who were all white. You start to see other people refusing to travel to South Africa because most of their money was made off of tourism. Then you start to see countries refusing or putting embargoes on them. We were one. They were kicked out of the Olympics. And then finally, you get a prime minister in South Africa that is willing to make a difference. And that man's name was F.W. de Klerk. F.W. de Klerk on the left decides that it's time to let Mandela go. But here's the key thing. If you just let Mandela go and try to make too rapid a change, what you end up getting are people who've been oppressed forever, kind of angry, and they want to take it out on people. That's not really the best way to go. So he actually sits down and works with Mandela on developing a plan on how to end apartheid, release Mandela, and have peaceful elections so that you don't have a revolution and a Republican government is formed. And they are able to do this incredibly successfully. As you see, here's a picture of de Klerk and Mandela here. On the right is the Nobel Peace Prize that they won jointly because they did work together. Everybody always kind of forgets F.W. de Klerk, and I guess he was a guy that was kind of okay with that. But Mandela goes on to being elected the first truly democratically elected president of South Africa, and you do have some victory here. And we can continue on talking about South Africa, but we're going to kind of move on. But this is the theme of what you see. Now, this also would happen in Asia, and one of the big nations that would cause a lot of conflict that did get its freedom was Vietnam. Vietnam had been occupied by the French for years, and even after World War II, the French tried to hold on to it, and the French were brutal and cruel and horrible. That would all change due to a man by the name of Ho Chi Minh. If you see him on the top right there, Ho Chi Minh was a young man that kind of got himself educated, and as a young man got out of Vietnam and started to travel the world. And he was really trying to figure out a way in which he could get freedom for his country. Interestingly enough, that picture on the top right was him arriving at the Treaty of Versailles. Yes, he went to Versailles to try to actually talk to some of the powers to get them to work together to get freedom for Vietnam. Well, turns out all of them were kind of pro-France, and actually he was trying to get a meeting with presidents like Wilson and others and was bodily removed, physically picked up and thrown out, so that really didn't work out well for him. But one of the places where he did get received well was Russia. And it was in Russia that Ho Chi Minh had really started to, dig communism. And he would go back and aid in the overthrow of the French being kicked out finally at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. So the Battle of Dien Bien Phu was when, again, the French face their final defeat in Vietnam and they are driven out. But this is the Cold War, okay? And we've talked about the Cold War already, and the UN wasn't about to let communism kind of go unchecked here. The United States was not about to allow that to happen. And so you get the UN steps in the Geneva Treaty, okay? And what they did was to split Vietnam into two halves, northern and southern Vietnam. And the idea was that 5 years after the treaty, they would allow Vietnam to have elections to determine what type of government and economic system that they were going to use. The thing was, in the end, the Vietnamese in all likelihood were probably leaning toward communism. Well, we, in the United States, weren't about to let that happen, nor were other nations. And as a result, what ends up happening is the Vietnam War. Now, we're not going to go too in-depth about the Vietnam War. You get that all in US 2. You see the horrors of that war, the political trauma, the mental trauma that it caused in the United States for not only our soldiers, but also the public, and it was just a brutal, brutal war. But that's really all getting started out of this nation trying to have their own freedom, whereas others wouldn't really let them. But we also see some things in the Middle East. Now, remember, after World War One, much of the Middle East was controlled by the British and the French. Why? Because they want oil. Shocker, we've seen it before. Well, you know what? After this time, you're going to get some people that they also want to break free. One of the most notable is Gamal Nasser was able to lead an uprising in Egypt in which they were able to push out all British influence, and he was able to do that in 1952 and really push something known as PanArabism, which is the same thing as Pan-Africanism, this unity in economics, in culture, to getting these Arabic nations to work together so that they can have greater economic and geopolitical success. And one of the big things that comes out, so many of these nations will be able to break free after World War One, and particularly after World War Two. So Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, because after World War One, a lot of these were, this was controlled. If you look at the mouse on the right, this was the Ottoman Empire. It breaks up. Britain and France kind of controls this, but eventually they get pushed out. And so you get these Arabic nations working together, and the most notable thing they create is OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which controls well over 66% of all the world's oil. And what the whole idea is, OPEC, is that they are going to work together in regulating pricing and output of oil. Now, they do have some non-Arabic nations, Libya, Algeria, Nigeria, Angola, Venezuela, and Ecuador, all work together. Actually, Libya and Algeria have high Arabic populations, but they also have native African populations as well. Nigeria has a lot of Muslims. These areas have Muslims as well. But these countries are not particularly powerful militarily. Okay, they're not. Well, Iran is, but the rest of them really aren't. But because oil is so crucial, by all of them working together, in the end, it's really successful, and they have a lot of political power because of that. So again, a different kind of anti-colonial move here. Now, other groups try to get freedom in different ways, and one of these groups is in Canada. Now, Canada was able to officially become free from Britain in 1982. It was basically, I know, 1982, you're like, wait, what? It did take a long time for them to get there, but the fact of the matter is they took their time and they did it without any type of violent break. But within Canada, you have a bit of a problem. And that's the other issue that we're going to talk about, these freedom movements from within countries. The Quebecois are French, and they are descended from the French. They speak French, and they're Catholic. The rest of Canada, about 95% of it, is Anglo, descended from the British, and Protestant. So early on, you would get some, believe it or not, some bombings and stuff like that in the early 80s, and violent protests, but eventually you start getting negotiations to try to get their freedom. That is why, like, for instance, a great example of a negotiation is that in Canada, sorry, need a little drink there, just, keeping it real. In Canada, the government conducts all business in French and English, so they both have same opportunities. They're not forced to learn a different language or anything along that line. But the thing is about in Quebec, or the province of Quebec, and I'll show you, Montreal right there, very nice. I mean, it's a really nice city. Montreal and Quebec City have enormous economic power. In fact, the bulk of the national economy goes through Quebec. And so if Quebec wanted to try to break out with the Quebecois, that's going to have massive economic ramifications. In 1995, they had a vote to leave, but came up just short, 49%. But after that, there was a big movement to try to get it up and going again. But Canada, in a very interesting and, hey, you can do it, but kind of a sneaky way, passes the Clarity Law of 1999. And what that says is that Quebecois are given the right to vote if they want to leave, but other ethnic minorities that live within Quebec in high density areas can also vote to then leave Quebec. So Quebec wouldn't necessarily get everybody. They would just get the areas in which the Quebecois are the strongest. And as of right now, it's kind of died down a little bit. It might happen again, but you see a lot of negotiation and things seem to be okay. Sometimes, however, that doesn't work. And the last thing I'm going to talk about today is the Biafra movement in Nigeria. This was started by the Igbo people, and I have a beautiful sculpture that was created by the Igbo. They were ethnically different than the rest of the people of Nigeria. And one of the big things that happened to them, unfortunately, is that after freedom that Nigeria gained from the British, there was lots of discrimination against the Igbo. The Igbo made up a very small percentage of the people in Nigeria, and they were, I mean, truly heavily discriminated against. And in 1967, they actually led a coup against the King of Nigeria in 1967, but they failed. Okay. They were also discriminated economically. They had less access to jobs. Religion and cultural differences also hurt them. And what eventually results is a massive civil war that goes from 1967 to 1970, and over 1 million people are killed. There are definitely some atrocities on both sides, but many Igbo were, basically just murdered, women and children, and it's still something that divides Nigeria today. And that's actually one of the reasons, because of some of the divisiveness in Nigeria, where certain terrorist groups are able, like Boko Haram, are able to have success, because there isn't a unity of the culture so much with all people. Nigeria is a nation that has billionaires, that has a lot of money, that has a lot of resources, but this division has caused further problems and allowed groups like Boko Haram to come in. And so what you see with this anti-colonial movement, some people are having success, some groups aren't. It's amazing the different types of things that are going on, and there's no way we could talk about them, but hopefully this gave you a sense of how much the world was changing in this short period of time. All right, make sure you get your comments and questions, and I'll talk to you guys soon.